Good morning, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference, Tomas and Rustis, and also the father of the project, David, for the possibility to be here. To be honest, I would not prefer to talk, but to listen about really interesting project and its results. But it is as it is, so I need to say something meaningful for you, and probably I should start from myself. I should say a few words about myself, otherwise it could be difficult to understand why did I choose such topic, East Central European historian confronting the evil, and why did I choose such perspective, how to analyze this particular question. I am cultural historian, and my research focuses on Lithuanian historiography, history theory, communicated and cultural memory, and also oral history. And so I try to find the answer how to think about history of the 20th century, looking from history theory perspective. But I found that topic for myself while working on a long running oral history project which lasted from 2007 to 2016, and while working on that project I wrote 4 books. One book about my teacher, Lithuanian famous historian Edvardas Gudavičius. Second book was devoted to painter Petras Repšys, probably the most famous Lithuanian painter who devoted his life to Lithuanian history, different topics, which he interpreted in different frescoes, paintings, graphic works. My third book was about film director, Lithuanian film director Almantas Grikevičius. This film director career was also linked to history and memory topics. And my final and last book was devoted to theater critic, Lithuanian Jewish public intellectual and Holocaust survivor, Professor Irena Veisaitė. And Irena's life story is marked by the presence of evil. And talking with Irena and listening her story, I suddenly understood that I need to rethink my experience, existential experience, as a historian who have met with really interesting, sensitive, bright person who survived the hell, and I tried to find some text written by history theorists which, in my opinion, could be helpful for me while trying to deal with my own experience. So, when I start to search the answer for myself, what does it mean for the historian to face with the evil, I suddenly understood that 20th century history became a problem for the historians. So, first of all, I would like to say a few words. Why has the 20th century history become a problem? 20th century history poses many challenges to those who study it. The 20th century emerged as a problem in different fields of the social sciences and humanities even before the end of 2000. The coincidence between the end of the century and of some of its most emblematic political phenomena seemed to reinforce the need for examination and new narratives. This is how the organizers of an international symposium entitled Thinking the 20th Century Perspective from the 21st Century hosted by the Faculty of Economics at the University of Coimbra. That conference was organized last February, described the significance of such a conference, emphasizing the need for new research and new narratives about the recent past. And I think that this outlook might be viewed to a certain extent as a trend. 7 years earlier, I attended another conference. The conference was titled "The History of the 20th Century Historiography," and that conference was held at the University of Athens in 2015. This symposium's organizers asserted that profound changes had occurred in the latter half of the 20th century in the study and representation of history, but that the emergence of these new developments had not helped us resolve all problems. Let me quote the conference organizers' one statement, the start of the quotation. "What is missing most on the 20th century's preoccupations with history is an exploration of the inner and deeper connection and interrelation between the various experiences of the century and the various approaches to history. How can we relate history and historiography in the 20th century? In what ways has the 20th century historical experience determined the study of the past?" What does it mean by what does it meant by the 20th century historical experience? In my opinion, one possible answer is that the history of the past century is closely connected with the expression of evil. You all know that the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, reflecting back on the time in which he lived, once said, the start of the quotation, "I remember it only as the most terrible century in Western history. Meanwhile, political theoretician Hannah Arendt, in her book about efforts by Jaspers, Benjamin, Lessing, and others to oppose the evils of the 20th century, spoke about dark times." So, the past century, often called the age of extreme, you know that such metaphor was proposed by a famous British historian, demonstrated that history can spiritually traumatize, physically cripple, or even kill nearly everyone living in Europe. Those who endured 2 world wars, the rise of various authoritarian and totalitarian regimes, the Holocaust, the Gulag, various forms of spiritual coercion, and in everyday life and other terrible things, have described all that experience, such as feeling of insecurity. So, the expression of evil in the 20th century has been remembered, reflected upon, and witnessed by several generations as a profound existential experience. And these encounters with the recent painful past have posed a challenge to 21st century society and scholars alike. It's I would like to show right now this slide. The traumatic memory of individuals and collective communities, evoking pain, discomfort, shame, and uncertainty about the past and the present, and the narratives about that transform that memory into history, employing one metaphor which I like a lot, of the Greek historian Antonis Liakos, are similar to the cloned dinosaurs from Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park, who escaped the park and now roam among us, destroying everything in their path and igniting memory wars. According to Liakos, At the start of the quotation, we live in a world where, in most places, history and memory are present in every moment of our public and private lives. We enjoy a nostalgic sense of past times, or we suffer from a traumatic sense of the past. The past is used for questioning, resisting, or even transforming the present. But the presence of the past may prove deadly. Dead memories are thirsty for blood, and there are many killer dinosaurs in the park, the end of the quotation. So, why have some of the themes of recent history and memory transformed in so-called Liakos killer dinosaurs in the 21st century public life? I would like to answer this question looking from two quite different perspectives. Let's start from the first theoretical perspective. The times are out of joint, or what does it mean to live during the crisis of modern time regime? And I would like to say a few words about prominent German intellectual, Professor Alida Assmann, and her book, Is Time Out of Joint? On the Rise and Fall of the Modern Time Regime. According to Assmann, in a concrete sense, Hamlet's old claim that the time is out of joint today means that something indeed seems to be wrong in the relation between the temporal registers of past, present, and future. It is becoming increasingly unclear how they mesh and how they diverge. We are experiencing a truly tectonic shift in the structure of these time zones, and the meaning and arrangement of these different temporal levels are no longer self-evident. So, in other words, we are living in a temporal chaos, which emerged as the consequences of the destroyed borders between past and present. And as you all know, the borders between temporal registers or time dimensions, such as past and present, play a decisive role in how society understands itself. The past was restricted from the present, and such separation was a chance for historians in the modern time regime, when Leopold von Ranke invented the new conception of historian detective, which are able to answer the question, who killed John Doe? Our professional community in modern epoch entered a territory which, according to British writer Virginia Woolf, was left beyond the touch of and control of the living. History reached its epistemological autonomy in the modern time regime by exploring the past as a foreign country. But now, as I already said, we are living in the temporal chaos, and that is why suddenly our dark, painful, and traumatizing past decided to return to our lives, denying the rules of modern time regime. And the end of the 20th century was the post-totalitarian and post-colonial epoch, when the great narratives were challenged by the return of the repressed memories and the rising of the new voices that told the stories, witnessed, blamed, questioned, doubted, and even ironized. So, the pendulum of our attention came back from the future to the past, which was no longer the valley of the dead and the silent. They overcame the temporal rupture, demanding attention, respect, and even justice, which is quite new situation for us as historians. Usually we like playing the role of God, to say who is wrong, who is right, but right now the past demands something new from us, because the past is no longer the domain that belongs to history and culture. It is the realm that is closely related to memory studies, trauma psychology, politics, and even the law, which is surprisingly new experience for us, or in legal, moral, or even therapeutic dimension, time does not move in one direction, from the present to the past. That is why some of themes of recent history and memory escape the park and now roam among us, destroying everything in their path and igniting memory wars. And historians aren't ready for that temporal chaos and for that challenge. Because such a situation requires intellectual efforts from the historians to change self-perception, perspective. According to Aleida Asman, it is not enough to ask the question, what do we want from the past? We need to refocus and to pose another question. What does the past want from us? Why does the past doesn't want to live our life and to spend some nice time in the museum or in archives? Now let's talk about the second practical dimension. And I prepared 8 insights looking from my personal perspective as a historian who live in Lithuania, as a citizen of East Central Europe. And my focus will be on the area of Europe stretching from central Poland to western Russia, which American historian Timothy Snyder has called the Bloodlands. So to a certain extent I'm going to talk about the course of the Bloodlands. The first insight, or the first, idea, reflecting on the dramatic events of the 20th century in the history of Lithuanian and Eastern European society, is a challenging task in the intellectual sense, since in this case the most important question of what actually happened very often remains without an unequivocal answer. I'm talking about great fog that envelopes the history of the Bloodlands, and that fog is slow to disperse because some of the subjects of academic research, such as events, processes, phenomena, biographies of individual actors, do not fit in the binary scheme of good, bad, right, wrong, hero, heroic, villainous. And it is extremely difficult challenge for the historians when politicians ask, so, would you be so kind to say it is right or wrong to install new site of memory devoted to this or that, and usually we need to find some brave to say we don't know. We are able to say 4 arguments why that person is looking from one perspective quite positive, and 6 arguments why we not recommend to do something with that memory, and why. And while I start saying something like this during one radio show, public politician which tried to understand what is my point of view from the party which now created government, was shocked. He thought that I'm playing some role of the role of the fool, or I came unprepared to give a clear answer, but I don't have the answer. What actually happened? So let's move to the second point. Notwithstanding the above, the narratives of the last century are, as a rule, the great importance of to the societies of Central and Eastern Europe as a foundation for the historical cultures and collective memory they have created today. Further aspect, the complex history and memory of the 20th century is full of controversies and contradictions, and not only the academic communities of this region, but also their societies have yet not decided or agreed upon the meanings of the elements or symbols that make up these cultures, nor on their hierarchy in their respective cultures. The fourth aspect, the importance of history and memory for the identity of a given society transforms them into the focus of activity not only for the academic community, but also for politicians, business people, the media, and various other interest groups. As a rule, therefore, the collective memory and cultural forms of a given society in modern times are created by thousands of hands. Another, okay. Slide, the fifth perspective. As a society attempts to negotiate the place and significance of the elements or symbols that make up in historical culture model, the ensuing process is usually chaotic and destructive, because there is no constructive dialogue. There is an effort to shout at each other and to quarrel. And that is why I would like to say a few words about communicative chaos, which is even further complicated by the facts that the individuals and institutions involved in the debate or in the parody employ different types of truths to express and justify their opinion. So, according to German intellectual history theorist Professor Jörn Rusen, we need to talk about scientific truth, about practical truth, about political truth, about even therapeutic truth, strategic, aesthetic, and even rhetorical truth. So, to a certain extent, it is normal that historians and politicians aren't able to understand each other, because they look at the same difficult, complex problem from different angles. And that is why, instead of dialogue, we initiate quite chaotic and usually destructive attempts to talk to each other and to listen to each other. Of course, there are a lot of other really important things, but I would like to say a few words about last statement, the eighth aspect. I'm talking about the war launched by the Russian Federation against Ukraine. So this traumatic experience, now I talk about my own situation, about Lithuanian historians' situation, actually created a lot of difficulties while talking about difficult questions related with history and theory, because Lithuanian and East Central Europe societies are under constant and huge stress. That is why they need only clear answers, right or wrong, bad or right, white or dark, and there is no time for some subtle reflections, attempts to negotiate between different memory societies. So the war launched by Russian Federation traumatized one more time societies which went long way during 3 decades of independence. The trends outlined above lead to a confrontation with the question: what do we remember today, and how and why do we remember it? A question that often leaves us with no clear answer. And the latter situation leads to a worrying conclusion. It is likely that we will be unable to agree on the interpretation of some of the most important topics of history and memory in the near future. And we will also not be able to find compromises that will be satisfactory for all memory communities in terms of evaluation of specific events, phenomena, processes, and their perpetuation in historical culture. So, what can humanitarian community and historians do in such a challenging situation? It is clear that the time has come to engage in reflection about what assumptions of thinking could help us explore new perspectives on the extreme of history, on the 20th century, on the people who find themselves in extreme situation, on the decisions they made, and finally on our memory that reflects on these traumatic experiences. And I would like to say that questions raised and addressed in my paper, in my talk, are not new. They have already received academic attention, and an important point of reference to this presentation has been the thesis proposed by my already mentioned Professor Alida Asman about the fundamental shift that has taken place in the modern time regime. Asman's idea has been further developed by George Kotkin and Donald Bloxham, who emphasize that history connects us to moral responsibility and moral judgments, as well as by Anton D. Baetz, who speaks of the need to create a code of so-called ethics and to invent or reinvent so-called responsible history. In the latter context, it is also important to recall Herman Paul's study of epistemic values and Professor Eva Domanska from Poznan University and her text on epistemic justice. So I don't want to leave you in a situation that I don't know what to do. Let's face the reality and let's try to do something. I know that there are a lot of attempts already to evaluate that situation and to propose something really interesting. Also, in that context, significant are efforts by Tismanianu, Snyder, Daniel Little to see the experience of peoples of the 20th century as even lessons for us. So, what should be done in this situation? The most hardest question for me and for you. I'll try to give some answers looking from my perspective while exploring how do the representatives of the most recent historiographic paradigms speak about history writing in the 21st century. Trying to identify and to group different ideas, I highlighted probably 8 answers in order to question what should be done. So let's start from the thesis that we feel the necessity to talk about historians' virtues. It was the topic which was denied, starting from Professor Leopold von Ranke, which proclaimed that when historians want to play a role of detectives, they can't talk about their values, ideas, moral obligations, because it is like disease. We will not be able to say something objective. But look at this situation where we are. We are already in the situation which is quite messy. So probably we should rethink what values can give for us. You all know, because you teach at the universities, work with PhD students, that historians' virtues are a theme of all times. Usually we propose for our students different texts which recommend them to cultivate certain personal qualities, such as impartiality, honesty, fair-mindedness, to do their work properly. These texts or textbooks starting from the antics, in turn echo a view that was shared, as I have already mentioned, by Greeks and Roman historians, namely that good historian or that good history writing not only requires a worthy topic and a decent style, but also a historian who is committed to working hard, reading carefully, judging scrupulously, and keeping biases in check. But it is obvious that the efforts to talk about manifestation of evil in history requires from the particular scientist modern methods, skills, and abilities. It also demands character traits historically known as virtues. And in my opinion, historians which work with hard topics should think about the need for constant self-reflection and self-criticism, of course, about moral responsibility, intellectual courage, empathy, and even readiness to use historical imagination as a methodological tool. What should be done in this situation? The second answer, the need for self-reflection and self-criticism. American author on history theory, Professor Alan McGill, in his text, Are We Asking Too Much of History?, attempted to outline the most important functions of history in the 21st century and identified 4 of them: creating and maintaining different types of identities, dissemination of certain ideas, providing entertainment. It is really important for my students to entertain them. The boring lecture is bad lecture. Usually they wrote in their reports after the semester. So I try to amuse them, to play some tricks, show some tricks during my lecture. Of course, it is sad, but such a situation right now. So to provide entertainment and being a useful discipline. So what do historians do as they perform these 4 tasks? According to McGill, the servants of the Muse Clio often choose to demand too little of themselves and history. In his view, too little is associated with historians' aversion to focus on the fundamental divide between reflection of the past and the present, while at the same time pointing out that the history that is chronologically and emotionally closest to us is also the most dangerous. The inability to engage in self-reflection when discussing the most important questions, how is history created, and finally a lack of courage to criticize our own discipline. So let me quote how McGill summarized his ideas. Rather than seeking to bolster present identity by linkage to the past, historians in their critical function ought to highlight what divides past from present. Here is ought to be a matter not of showing continuity between past and present, rather of showing how the past provides a reservoir of alternative possibilities, of path not taken, of difference. Another answer, the third answer to the question what should be done in this difficult situation when historians face with the representation of evil in history, we need to think about historians' moral responsibility regarding a people's past, present, and future. It's not new. Historians, as a rule, feel a dual responsibility to the society of today, to which they address their texts, and to the people of the past, which they study. Working with the traces of the past, historians usually make contact with a potential world, which, thanks to the craft of those who study the past, a reader is able to inherit. Telling a story about the past is related to the ability to hear witnesses. As literary historian Paul Zumthor puts it, historians are always ready to listen, the start of the quotation, Listen to the discourse of an invisible order who speaks to us from some deathbed or some coach, of which the exact location is unknown to us. We attempt to distinguish in the fantasies of this stranger the echo of a voice which somewhere probes, knocks against the wall silence, begins again, is stifled, at the end of the quotation. So the ability to hear witnesses, it's not just a matter of naming certain facts and highlighting important events. It is just as important to show the fate of people who lived in the past in a present perspective and thus preserve them from future. That is why it is really important for me to say a few words about American philosopher David Leisher, which asserts that we must struggle against the tendency to consider the past only from the angle of what is done, unchangeable past. We have to reopen the past. Reopening the past in turn has enormous value for the present. But it's not enough to let the voices of the past speak. Historians must find a way to theoretically reflect of these voices, materiality and reality. Of course, it is easy to say something like this, but how we should show the materiality and reality of these voices which would like to say something about their painful experience. How do I personally try to reopen the past and to reinterpret these voices? My answer is quite simple, thanks to the Polish intellectual, historian, philosopher and former academic director of European Museum in Brussels, Professor Krzysztof Pomer. Thank you, Tomasz, for buying books of Professor Krzysztof Pomer once when I asked you for help, and it helped me to create this presentation. According to Pomer, there is not one, but at least 3 levels that must be employed when speaking about the complex questions of history and memory that preoccupy us, those associated with the manifestation of evil and suffering, and the scars left by that evil on the human souls, and the memory of society. There are cognitive, hermeneutic and existential levels. We all, as historians, deal with cognitive level. We try to understand what actually happened. But it's not enough, according to Krzysztof Pomer, because on the hermeneutic understanding level, we need to seek to reflect on liminal situations and what people far removed from us in time experience. And the last but not least, on the existential level, we need to address the possibility of, we need to try to find the possibility of forgiveness and reconciliation. Of course, it is really difficult path and sometimes unsuccessful path, but according to Krzysztof Pomer, we need to try to go to this direction. Looking from my personal perspective, when I recorded a life story of Holocaust survivor Irena Veisaitė, I couldn't understand how she was able to forgive for those people who killed her whole family. And I really disappointed her when during our last interview she asked about my own experience, and I said, theoretically I understand the concept of forgiveness, but I can't, even after a whole year of our conversation, to understand how it really works in practice. She was so disappointed in me, but I was at least honest, because theoretically it is Of course, it is really easy to say something like this. We need to think about forgiveness and reconciliation, but we all are not only historians, but also human beings. Another really important perspective from me, how should historians employ an empathetic approach while trying to reopen the past. I really like the concept of empathy. I believe that it could help us. Empathy, as philosopher Dominique Le Capra noted, humanizes historical understanding and prevents people and their experiences in the past from being turned into a cold subject of academic study in which the historian is merely an aloof observer. The thoughts of a given researcher of the past to understand the other are, as a rule, related to 5 segments of the aforementioned path. I mentioned these 5 segments. In the first section, one projects one's own thoughts and feelings onto the historical situation. In the second, as a rule, the key is the understanding of the paradox of the fact that modern man's thinking and behavior are different from those of those who lived in the past. In the third and fourth segments, historical inquiry seeks to understand the unique situation in which a particular person finds themselves, and the fifth delves into the circumstances that have led to the misunderstanding of one another's intentions and actions by people at a particular point of intersection of time and space, which in turn has shaped the unfolding of the history. Of course, on the latter path, a crucial step for the historian is the creation, refinement of the narrative. So let's talk. No, it's too early to show that. Information, let's stick with the empathy. Empathy avoids a deterministic assessment of the past and its people. And it directs our attention away from what has happened to what could have happened, thereby opening up a space of possibility and continuity, and enable a better understanding of victories as well as setbacks, failures, defeats, disappointments, and tragedies. In this instance, recalling Carsten Stoeber's thesis, we can expand upon the previously mentioned metaphor of developing historical empathy as a path to be followed. After completing the 5 sections of the path, we come to the 6th, where we are given the opportunity to better know ourselves by reflecting one question: what would I have felt, thought, or done in the other's place? Probably this is the most important question for us when we try to deal with the presence of evil in history. So by trying to understand the other, we come to know ourselves. This fact of knowledge both brings us closer and separates us. For example, I understood that I'm not able to forgive by listening my hero of my book. So it is sad, but it is as it is. Probably I am not so good as my hero of my book, but I need to deal with this existential, not only professional experience. Of course, it is a really difficult question and rather unpleasant exercise of self-introspection. That is why, looking from politicians, journalists, and society's point of view, it is better to choose less complicated a relationship with the painful past. Such a relationship or path I call the duty to remember properly. It is really a dangerous call for the historians. I strongly believe that faced with the duty to remember properly, we must stay brave and leave the past open for the new interpretation. I have already mentioned that the war, full-scale war launched by Vladimir Putin, activated efforts to persuade historians to remember properly, to talk about history properly, to say who is right, who is wrong, looking at the concrete historical subjects. In this case, I will draw on the ideas of the French historian Henri Rousseau. As you know, Henri Rousseau studied the Vichy regime as a phenomenon of history and memory. In Rousseau's view, Western society at the end of the 20th century was confronted with aggressive pressure that developed into a duty to remember, usually expressed in the creation of various sites of remembrance, while leaving no room for individuals and society to escape this duty. Rousseau was convinced that historians must renounce the role of agitator of collective memory being imposed on them in this situation, and that they must constantly reflect on the fundamental differences between memory and history, as well on the search for truth. The instrumentalization of history, forcing it to serve the needs of memory, tends to encourage the reduction of images of the past into simplistic schemes and categories, such as traitors and victims. In this case, it is a historian's duty to make sure that the past remains open to the new questions and interpretations in an attempt to understand people and their actions in liminal situations. Researchers should therefore not play a role of prosecutors, lawyers, or even judges in regard to the past, but rather should, according to Henri Rousseau, try to understand. If having refused to judge, historians are unable to understand, then their work, our work, is meaningless. Another really important topic for me as a citizen of East Central Europe, a historian's duty in shaping the intercultural competences of today's society. And I evaluate historian's craft as a journey through time and space, and as an ability to meet other people from different epochs and to initiate dialogue with these people. And for that dialogue, I need to, how to say, to learn some competences, to learn how to ask politely, how to listen carefully, as Herodotus did when he traveled around the ancient Greek world. He traveled a lot, he listened a lot, he talked with different people, and he respected them. I think that East Central Europe citizens lack abilities, and even they don't want to understand each other, and it is sad. So today the science of history has an opportunity to tap into a vast array of sources that testify to the diversity of human experiences, as well as to the diversity of political and social life. These sources speak to us about different things, but initiating dialogue, posing questions, listening to the answers and interpreting them, those who study the past must, as German historian Christian Meyer argues, also constantly reflect on the possible as well as unobtainable results of their work. What obligations this knowledge allows us to fulfill and what possibilities it may offer. As previously mentioned, historians have a responsibility to the dead, but at the same time, they also bear the burden of the great responsibility to present and future generations. We need to be much clearer than we have been in the past about the image we have created of each other. We also need to use history to understand each other better, says Meyer, pointing out that modern man clearly lacks the so-called intercultural competences that would help us to understand the other who is distant from us in time and space. How we as the historians could educate society and foster its intercultural competences. I would like to say a few words about guidelines, how to make history a profession of understanding. I really like Mexican writer Enrique Floresano's idea that we should create or recreate history as a profession of understanding. And this writer criticizes different attempts to squeeze history in a confining jacket of determinism, avoiding explanations of historical phenomena based on singular causes, rejecting the division of history into areas, spheres, disciplines, and specialization that fragment our understanding of social reality and its evolution. So Floresano called us for closely associating the economic, social, cultural, and political levels of history, and at the same time to avoid different ideological and theoretical schemes, which are good tool, but they limit our ability to understand or to look at the history as a complex of different actions, ideas, and I know from my own perspective that one particular historian are the happiest person on earth when he or she is able to work on one concrete topic, to spend year while searching for the answer in the archives. But it is a bad for history, which Floresano called or proclaimed as a profession of understanding. I believe that historians of so-called Bloodlands territory should interpret Floresano's words as the invitation to write books which overcome one fact, one event, one personality, one state, one nation paradigm, and correspond so-called the transnational term program. I understood the invitation to finish my talk. A few more minutes of that theoretic torture and we will be at the end of the road. So we should correspond, so-called the transnational term program, and build bridges between different societies and memory communities. We need new, interesting, well-written, emotionally inspiring stories which help us better understand each other. Why did I mention the features of historical narrative? Because I believe that the narrative changes our understanding of reality. So I can state, or it can be reasonably argued, that one of the most important challenges for historians in the 21st century is to find a way of speaking that responds to the new situation. The ability to find an authentic, correct, and impactful way of speaking allows for the emergence of a so-called prospective history that creates new perspectives on reality. Important not only for the interpretation of the past, but also for the creation of connection between the past and present, and also with the future. And the last but not least thing which I would like to mention in my long, bored and exhausting theoretically presentation, we should not forget that it is really important to understand one thing, the importance of the dimension of the present. When we speak of liminal situations and experience in history and their impact, we should state that from the point of view of historical theory, what is more important, it's not what decisions were made by a given historical actor or what consequences that decision produced, but we are but what we are going to do with that historical experience today. The latter thesis, as a fundamental assumption of historical thinking, has been regularly expressed by historical theorists in one form or another in the latter half of the 20th century, and the issues discussed in this presentation are echoed in an idea developed by the Spanish politician and philosopher Manuel Cruz in his book on the difficulty of living together, Memory, Politics and History. According to Manuel Cruz, the important thing is not what they have done with us, but what we do with that they have done with us. Thus, in this case, the most important thing is the responsibility we bear as people who did not live in the past in the face of history. In other words, history is the past made contemporarily relevant. So when we think about people in liminal situations and faced with fateful choices, we are talking about ourselves. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Aurimas. So we can open the discussion. Do you have questions for our guest?
I did my best to exhaust the audience. Everyone wants coffee, fresh air, water.
Okay, we have, if we don't have any questions.
I can see
okay. So, and we have like eight people joining us online. So, if you have any questions, please raise hand or write a question down in the chat. So, Nina, Joanna, who will start?
I've got two questions. So I wanted to ask about this good narrative, this meaningful narrative. What form will that take nowadays? What are you talking about writing good history books? Are you talking about communicating with younger generations? Likely to read whole books? So that's my first question. And also, in your introduction, you talked about your interest in oral history, and I wondered about the use of that in this sort of memory work.
Thank you very much for probably the most difficult question, having in mind the whole complex of body of problems mentioned in my presentation. While answering to your question regarding the quality of narrative, new narrative, I would like to recall one historian which now lived in Los Angeles, Robert Rosenstone. He was born in Odessa, by the way. Manifesto. History is a place for a bird to fly, and Robert Rosenstone, in his manifesto, stated that historians should reinvent new forms of communication with society, which lives in completely different situation in comparison with 20th century societies. So Robert Rosenstone, provoked in his text to work with film directors, to create some new digital forms and employed, of course, internet as a space where we are able to communicate easily and quickly with the young generation. But I'm too old for all this stuff which was mentioned by Robert Rosenstone, and I strongly believe that historians in Great Britain already invented. The most important, how to say, and the most effective way to solve a lot of problems, we need to learn how to write emotionally captivating and stylistically good stories. Let's start from the beginning. For example, I am able only to share my own experience. Lithuanian historians community chose German and Polish way to do history, and according to that German philosophy, the good academic text is boring, is extremely difficult to understand, with a lot of footnotes, and actually it's sad because it's a road to nowhere, according to Robert Rosenstone, and I think that I fully understand his what to say, frustration when he not talk or even shout that we need to do something, because we are losing our ability to say to the society something really important, because our language too old-fashioned, too uncozy, too difficult. So let's start from learning from writers how to write good stories based of course on factual material. And another question related with oral history projects.
Yeah, but we should move on to another question
Okay.
from someone else. I shouldn't hold
Because
the
it is
It's
a
big
dangerous
question,
situation. I am able to spend a whole day talking about my oral history project, so probably we will avoid that trap.
Yeah, well, I think I was kind of thinking in the same direction, but maybe from a slightly different vantage point. Like listening to you and also looking at all these very respectable figures of old white man historians.
Yes.
I was just thinking how much they experience, which is very much the Second World War experience, some of them were Jewish, is still relevant in the present. So what is the message they actually, formulated and they experienced, but what is still relevant, which you try to show, but on the other hand, is that still communicable in the public sphere? So perhaps I do understand that, we also need kind of the historian as a public figure, someone who is like in between, like the academia as a kind of the safe space, and then as a figure which can communicate to the public. But I just thinking if this is still a figure which the public needs.
Just to add what Joanna said, because my vision was the same. A question maybe, if you know, when these old wise men came to these notions of what you have presented, and how long it took them while meeting the evil to reflect in the way they are reflecting.
To be honest, I don't know how to answer this question because I don't know. I simply tried to find some answers for myself, and probably I forgot to search the context, how one or another idea was grown in one or another historian's conception, but I'm sure for 100% that right now I'm talking about decade which started from 2000 probably 10 or 15. History theorists are working really hard while trying to understand the new complete situation in which we are facing with different problems, and I can give you one example. Next year, historians from all over the world which work with history methodology and history theory topics are going to get in Lisbon. There will be organized the 5th convent of historians who belong to History Theory Network, and the topic of that convent will be historian and the moral responsibility. So, to a certain extent, it is a tendency that that something is happening right now. But of course, when I attended conference in Coimbra last February, I suddenly understood that my, as a citizen of East Central Europe, perspective, what is the most problematic questions looking at the 20th century history, quite differs from scholar which came from Brazil or from Portugal, and for me it was like wake-up call that I need to come back to the roots and to learn about ability to listen the other scholars. That, for example, history theorists from Greece completely different understand the most important problems when we are talking about historian and moral responsibility, or how difficult and bad was 20th century, and how dangerous legacy is for us. And talking about 20th century and Second World War, I can give you short answer, but also looking from my own perspective. I was born and grew up in Lithuania. I finished Vilnius University, and looking from Lithuanian society's perspective, Second World War was finished in 1993, when the last Russian Federation soldier left Lithuania. So this is the war which ended at the end of the 20th century. So I can give you one example. When whole Europe celebrated the 100th anniversary of First World War, nobody cares in Lithuania about that event, and it was like, it's not our history. Well, we proclaimed after that war independence, but it somehow happened, and nobody showed intention to rethink that Second World War, but First World War. But Second World War is a cornerstone for us as a society.
Okay, Christina?
Yeah, I think that it continues a bit in the direction of your encounter with the Brazilian scholars in Coimbra, and I kind of thought from the beginning that, I'm an Eastern European working in a Western European context, but going back regularly to Hungary where I'm from, and I see the total blindness and absolute disinterest for any post-colonial, decolonial attempt there, as if we were absolutely not concerned with this history at all. And at the same time, I think that proclaiming that the greatest suffering and the greatest evil happened in the 20th century. Well, the slave trade started in the 15th century and was continuous for so many centuries, and all the colonial suffering. So maybe the First and Second World Wars were the first time when Europeans on European soil were confronted with types of evil that other people were already very familiar with. And is there any tendency or attempt or need in Eastern Europe to somehow apprehend and respond to these connections? Like, are we completely untouched, or can we still believe or assert that this is not our history and we are unconcerned by anything that happened outside of Europe, because we were not the colonizers of those people and we were not the victims of those colonizations?
Probably I can say only one thing. We spent too much time working in our little ghettos. I witnessed as a historian based in Lithuania and which emotionally and intellectually attached to Eastern Central Europe history. So all these facts mentioned by you, to a certain extent, are emotionally unfamiliar in this cultural context yet.
But just to follow on from that, I think some of the traditions that you mentioned Hannah Arendt, that's very present in Arendt's work, isn't it, when she's talking about totalitarianism, she's making that link back to colonial violence. So I think that tradition in writing of history has maybe been submerged, but it's not like it's a new idea. It's been around at least since the end of the Second World War, I would say.
Yeah, I can agree with you. So I would like to return to, one more time that I wanted to tell you about my personal journey. I'm not an ambassador of Lithuanian historians community. It's how to say my personal point of view, but of course I feel some tendencies and there are a lot of a lot of my colleagues which aren't ready to deal with the topics mentioned by you. There are a lot of historians who don't agree that Brazil, Portugal, something interesting or valuable for us. We have some doubts about that. But it's natural. We need to learn how to talk and to listen to each other. It's first of all the task for us as the historians.
One intriguing thing which I noticed from your talk and the references is that the historians are now, at least it is suggested, that they should not be emphasizing how the past has defined us or how the past is important for the present, but show how it is different and how we should show the roads not taken. I think that is something which coming from Pakistan and South Asia, I think that is something which maybe we should be discussing in today or tomorrow, and if you have any comments whether you agree with this reference which you have quoted.
Yes, it is a really important concept for me, because I think that when we try to colonize the past as an addition to our present, we simply deny for people who lived in a distant time the ability to show for us their integrity, their otherness, and we don't show them respect. We don't listen to them. We just play a role of God. For historian, the role of God, it's like a game. We know how particular stories ended. That is why I really like Brother Strugatsky's novel It's Hard to Be God, which tells the story about a historian who flew to a distant space to some distant planet and tried to live in the so-called Middle Ages period and try to not interfere in that world and try to be only observer, and of course he failed. But we need to respect the otherness of people who lived before us.
Okay, I see we don't have any questions from the online participants, so I think that we can thank our presenter, Aurimas.